The New Orleans Saints have some major unanswered burning questions ahead of training camp's kickoff. And we're going to take a look at all of them today. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at some of the biggest burning questions that remain right before the New Orleans Saints begin training camp tomorrow. We're going to take a look at the offensive and defensive line rotation, which is a must in order to be able to make sure you're getting the best players out on the field. We'll dive into some of the injury updates that we're hoping to hear before camp begins, and we're going to kick everything off with what matters most going into training camp, which is the quarterback battle and how the New Orleans Saints will handle it. We got all that and a little bit more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can put down $5 as your first bet ever over on FanDuel. If you win that, you can get up to $150 in bonus bets. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started today. I think that the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be rotating Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough with the first team in that order all throughout training camp. And we expect that we're going to be able to get a little bit of media availability. Coaches and GMs typically do some media availability ahead of training camp kicking off. And so it's a great time to ask those kinds of questions. How do you see this quarterback battle going? How do you anticipate kind of building up the evaluation? And what's the rotation going to look like? I think Spencer Rattler should get the first crack at the first practice's first team reps. The reason why is because he has the seniority advantage. Now, if the Saints are going to go out there right away and have Jake Haener be a big part of this quarterback battle, then maybe he gets some of those first team reps because he's technically the senior of them all 3 years versus 2 years with Spencer Rattler and 1 year with Tyler Shough. But I maintain that this battle is very much between Tyler Shough and Spencer Rattler, and that Jake Haener is kind of battling for his opportunity to be the third quarterback in this quarterback room, which is a valuable position to have, especially in today's NFL, when you have the opportunity to designate the emergency third quarterback and all that. I think him and Hunter Dekkers are going to be fighting for that spot. But I do think that the rotation of giving Spencer Rattler first team reps the first day, Tyler Shough the first team reps the second day, Spencer Rattler again the third day, Tyler Shough the fourth day, so on and so forth, makes a lot of sense. And it's the way to go, right? Like, there's some things that you do sometimes in the NFL that don't really have to do with like preparing for the battle or diving into the competition. Like, sometimes there's just some customary things that you do as to be like proper in a way. And giving seniority in a battle first team reps is one of those things. You think back to last year, I know it wasn't a quarterback battle, but you think back to last year, the Saints drafted Spencer Rattler, right? And so the first day of training camp, obviously Derek Carr got first team reps, and we saw Jake Haener get second team reps, and then Spencer Rattler get the third team reps. And then the next day, it was Derek Carr with the first team, Spencer Rattler with the second team, and then Jake Haener with the third team, so on and so forth. But Jake Haener, being the senior player of that conversation, he ended up getting those first team reps. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see tomorrow when Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough and Jake Haener and Hunter Dekkers hit the field, that Spencer Rattler is the first one to get the first day's first team reps. So I think that that's going to be a big thing. And we'll be able to get a little bit more information on that hopefully later on today as we go through. So I think that that's a good way to go. And I think that rotation is really important because, look, not only do you want to see each of these quarterbacks working with the first team players, but some of those second team players become first team players by the time that it's all said and done, at wide receiver, at running back, at tight end, on the offensive line, all that. Like, there's a lot of opportunity for those guys to kind of move up the depth chart, even if they're not actually holding on to roster spots that way. It's a big part of what happens during training camp of rotating and looking at different combinations of players and all these other things. The other thing is, whenever there's an injury with the first team guys, and then all of a sudden the second or third team guys step up during the regular season, having like chemistry, I guess, like some level of chemistry between the quarterback and those players is helpful. And so getting the opportunity to kind of rotate those quarterbacks a little bit with those different sort of teams of players, different statuses of players, however it is that you want to look at it, I think could pay off in the long run as well as you manage the attrition of your unit. Because there's always going to be injury. There's always going to be some player having to step in. There's always going to be somebody that's got to tie a shoe, that's got to get new, this, that, and the other, whatever it might be. And so I think that all of this is absolutely possible. So, and I think a good choice. So I would not be surprised to see Spencer Rattler getting the first day's first team reps, and then Tyler Shough getting the second day's first team reps, and then so on and so forth from there in that kind of odd, even pattern. I wouldn't be shocked to see that, but we'll learn more about that hopefully later on today. The other thing that it comes down to when it comes to quarterback competition is, what is Kellen Moore looking for, right? We talked a lot about how one of the big things that Kellen Moore is looking for is somebody that's going to be able to come in and manage the operation. That's going to be able to go into the huddle, call the plays, get out of the huddle cleanly, but also quickly with a sense of urgency, get to the line of scrimmage and be able to see what the defense is giving them and be able to take advantage of that by the time, after they snap the ball and as they go through their actual progression and executing the play and game management and all these other things. And so very much a lot of what Kellen Moore is looking for is kind of above the shoulders, just as much as it is, the ability to make the pass and good ball location, good anticipation, good arm strength, good arm talent, right? When we talk about arm talent, we mean not just somebody that can push the ball downfield, but also somebody that can fit the pass into a tight window or locate a pass where only a receiver can catch it, right? Can make a play on it and all those other things. It's kind of what we talk about when we talk about arm talent as a whole. It's not just how far can you throw the ball down the field. And so I think that like that combination of things is going to be all the stuff that Kellen Moore is going to be looking for. And I look forward to asking him about that again, because I know that like during OTAs and minicamp, it was very much about the operation and the fundamentals, if you will, or the foundation, I guess is probably the right way to say that, was a big part of what it is that Kellen Moore was most focused on. And that was the case for all of OTAs and minicamp. Remember, the Saints didn't do any team drills, no full 11-on-11 drills. When they did walkthroughs, they didn't use helmets. Why? Because they didn't want to be concerned about the physicality. They wanted to be concerned about laying the foundation of what the team is. So now that you've done that and you move into training camp, does the criteria change in terms of how one of these young quarterbacks can catch your eye and what it is that you're looking for? So those are going to be very interesting questions that the Saints will have to answer as training camp approaches and as training camp gets underway in just a couple days. Yay, we're finally here. The other big thing that the New Orleans Saints are going to have to answer is some of the injury updates. And there's 3 burning questions that they've got to answer there, leading off, of course, with the return timeline for Taesm Hill. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Rougiette. It's an exciting time around the NFL, but it can be an exciting time elsewhere as well, and you want to be ready for it. That's where Rougiette comes in. Maybe you've heard of Viagra or Cialis, maybe you've even tried it, but now it's time to go beyond the pill, and I want to introduce you to Rougiette Ready, a 3-in-1 formula that's a tablet, dissolves under your tongue, kicks in within 15 minutes, while some of those other pills can take up to hours to kick in. This allows you to be ready with increased blood flow, arousal in the brain. Head over to Rougiette.com/LockedOnNFL today and use promo code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL with promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please review Rougiette website for full safety information. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints have 3 burning injury-related or health-related questions that they must answer as training camp kicks off. We appreciate you very much for being here for another episode. For your second listen today, don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans after this as well. Our good friend Jake Madison covering everything going on with the New Orleans Pelicans. Are they cursed? It might be time to look into that, right? Anybody got a voodoo priest or priestess we can call up and get some help for the Pelicans here? So, look, I think that the New Orleans Saints have three big injury questions. Speaking of curses, three big injury questions that they have got to answer. The first one centers around tight end Taesm Hill. The second one centers around tight end, probably the most injury-stricken area of the roster going into training camp, right? But that would be tight end Moreau, where you want some answers there. And then the other side of this also is like, are there any surprises around the rest of the roster? So let's go all the way back. We'll rewind to number one, which is Taesm Hill, right? Everyone wants to know when Taesm Hill is going to be back. Is Taesm Hill going to be back? Had a December 1st injury in the Week 13 matchup against the Los Angeles Rams. That was an ACL tear. I've heard some things about additional knee damage, heard some things about there not being additional knee damage. It's very inconsistent. That's okay. That's kind of what you would hope for it to be. You want to keep all that information inside the building and everything. But like, not always the easiest injury to come back from, especially as you're going into your year 35 season. And so you're probably looking at about a 9-month timeline. So if we do that math, December going into January with that surgery, right? So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. So at best, you might see him back with the team, potentially with his practice window opening up in September, unless he's well ahead of schedule, which is certainly something that's possible. Taesm Hill has managed and returned from injury before and never really has looked like he's lost a step in the process. Is actually really impressive. But what is kind of the plan with Taesm Hill? In terms of when they expect to see him? Are they going to put him on the physically unable to perform list to begin the season, which would then require him to be out a certain number of games before that practice window can be activated? Or do they just want to put him on injured reserve? Remember, you can now put 2 players on IR at roster cuts, and they only have to miss the first 3 games of the season, first 4 games of the season, and then they can start to come back with the practice window opening. That's why I say like a little, it changes in terms of how much time is actually there. But you have that kind of 3-week practice window where somebody can return at any point during that time. And so there's a couple of different ways that the Saints can kind of brace for the return of Taesm Hill. So what's the plan there? And so we'll see. The Saints can start to put players on physically unable to perform as early as today, as players report, go through physicals, figure stuff out, all that. So Taesm Hill, of course, is one of the players to watch out for a potential injury list designation now, or potentially just hangs on to that 90-man roster and then gets that injury list designation as the season begins, where maybe you have a little bit more flexibility and a tighter timeline there. The other player that I'm really curious about, as I mentioned, is Moreau. So he had a pretty bad knee injury that forced him to not only be carted off the field, but also like just kind of like dragged off the field at one point because he was like right on the sideline. And so they dragged him off the field to the sideline to get him out of the field to play and stuff like that. And then the cart came and got him. And that was in the week 17, last like week of the season, game 17, whatever. And so like that was a really tough one because you're so close to your season being over and then you have this injury. So he also needed a reported surgery over the course of the season, but it seems that he's a little bit further on the timeline. He told our good friend Rod Walker over at NOLA.com that he'd say that he's ahead of schedule. And when asked whether or not he would come back for training camp or be back for the beginning of the season, he said he would be happy with either timeline. And that's completely understandable. But so it seems like that's kind of the approach for Moreau is get him back for training camp if you can. Otherwise, he might be ready to start the season. So I would expect him to start on the 53-man roster in that case, unless there's some kind of a setback or if he's going to be out for maybe a little bit longer at the beginning of the season than anticipated, then maybe that's not the case. But I would expect him to be on the 53-man roster in that case if he is going to be back early on in the season, game 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? And so we'll see where things go when it comes to him, but that is one of those burning questions that I think you ask. He's been around. So Taysom didn't participate in OTAs and he didn't participate in minicamps, but Taysom was spotted during the first mandatory minicamp day, kind of standing over on the sideline. Moreau was seen throughout OTAs and throughout mandatory minicamps, and throughout off-season workouts, working out with the team. Although during OTAs and mandatory minicamps, he didn't participate in drills, but he was off to the side, either working with trainers or doing some kind of like individual position drills, helping the other tight ends. So like in a drill where Juwan Johnson is working on contested catches, then Foster Moreau might be the guy with the big yellow cone. I call them the bugles because they look like the bugle chips that you use to put on your fingers and act like you're a witch. Maybe. I don't know. Was I the only one? Maybe. But, you put this big, like, kind of thing that looks like a bugle on your arm, and it's like this big yellow cone, and you use that so that you have, like, kind of an extended arm, but padded to be able to try to knock the football out so you're not making, like, physical contact with each player and all these other things. And he would often be that guy with the bugle arm that would be trying to knock the ball away and everything like that. So it's like those little things. You saw him not participating in practices, but participating off to the side with some of his teammates pretty consistently throughout OTAs and throughout mandatory minicamps. Mandatory minicamps. So we'll see. He seems to be a little bit further on his timeline maybe than Taesm Hill is, but this is going to be another one of those big questions that hopefully somebody would be willing to answer. The last thing is, are there any surprises? Because we did see some players throughout OTAs and mandatory minicamp deal with some what we would call minor ailments or minor injuries. Quincy Riley, the rookie cornerback out of Louisville, had a offseason procedure after being drafted. He didn't participate in OTAs or rookie minicamp, but he did participate in the final day of mandatory minicamp. So does that progress continue? Nick Saldiveri missed some time with an injury. Rookie safety Jonas Sanker missed some time with an injury. Undrafted rookie cornerback Dallas Beanham missed some time with some injury. And all three of those were considered minor ailments, minor injuries. And so does one of those surprise and may have worsened by the time that we last saw them? Or does one of them surprise and was actually just simply worse than was originally thought? Or are all of them back out on the football field? Or is there somebody that between mandatory minicamp and training camp, players have a long time to try to stay active, stay in shape, and get ready for training camp, and they have to do it away from NFL facilities. Sometimes there are injuries that happen in those circumstances. So does something like that happen to where you get the NFI or non-football injury designation? That's another one of those big questions as well. So those are three big burning injury questions that I think the Saints will need to answer as they walk into training camp. The final thing that I want to take a look at is the offensive line and the defensive line, particularly the rotation that we'll see there and why it's vital. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is an ad by BetterHelp. I've been focusing on workplace stress here recently because 61% of the global workforce is reporting higher than average like work stress levels. And this was a big thing for me in my therapy journey. And BetterHelp was a huge, huge help with it, developing some positive coping skills, as well as setting some healthy boundaries. Like BetterHelp and my therapist is actually the reason why I don't have audio notifications on my phone, because I would have a physical adverse reaction to any time I got like a text message or an email or something like that. And so it just made things a little bit more positive around the idea of my work-life balance. And that is the kind of help that you can get over with BetterHelp. And now, the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp, can help provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. You can unwind from work today with BetterHelp. Our listeners will get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to our friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, which means you can get in on everything from the WNBA to golf on the green, to some high-stakes soccer action, and of course, baseball under the lights. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling with FanDuel today? Whether you're betting on odds, lines, different player props, you can get it into same-game parlays. You can even look well ahead as well. Like right now, Tyler Shough, plus 1,400, fourth best odds to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. Maybe you're feeling really good about the young quarterback. You can go and check that out. But of course, Cam Ward out of the Tennessee Titans is the favorite. We can dive into all that and much more over at FanDuel today. And if you're new to FanDuel, well, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I think two really important things the New Orleans Saints must do over the course of training camp, behind, of course, their quarterback battle, is figure out their offensive line and their defensive line. And it's not just from a starter perspective, but also the depth perspective. This is a league where you win by building from the inside out. You win in the trenches and you figure out the rest from there. And to the Saints' credit, they did a lot of things that kind of lend itself towards that very kind of philosophy, right? They go into the top 10 at number 9 overall, and they draft their new starting left tackle in Kelvin Banks Jr., reshuffle their offensive line, give Trevor Penning new life at left guard, take Taesm, move him back over to right tackle as well. Then you also saw this team bring in some really good depth pieces, veteran depth pieces in Dillon Radunz, as well as Will Clapp Jr. They brought in a really solid and promising undrafted free agent in Easton Kilty, brought out another standout guy from the University of South Carolina, the Gamecocks, Torricelli Simpkins. Then you flip over to the defensive side, and you saw maybe more work done on the defensive interior than the edge rushers, which makes sense with the shift from the sort of more multi-front but even front dominant Dennis Allen defensive system to the odd front dominant Brandon Staley system. When I talk about even front to odd front, I literally mean like an even number of down linemen with their hand in the dirt versus an odd number of down linemen with their hand in the dirt. And so we're expecting to see a little bit more 3-4 defense from Brandon Staley. And so we saw, the trade acquisition of Davon Godchaux, the draft acquisition of Vernon Broughton, the additional signing here recently of Jonathan Bullard, who at 6'3", 290 pounds is somebody that can immediately contribute. He was a key contributor last year to the Minnesota Vikings for 17 games in a Vikings defense that was number 2 against the run last season. Remember, the Saints were second worst against the run last season at number 31 overall. It feels like there's still some work to be done on the edge. They've got 3 guys at the top of their depth chart in Chase Young, Carl Granderson, and Cam Jordan. But who fills out the rest of that room? Then I think you got to look at, can Isaiah Foskey fit in this new 3-4 defensive system? Is it more akin to what he did as the all-time sack leader at one of the most storied collegiate franchises with Notre Dame? And if not, can you turn to a 7th-round draft pick in Fadil Days? Can you turn to an undrafted free agent in Jasheen Davis, both of which very talented and I think bring a lot of promise with them? And then also a familiar face for defensive coordinator Brandon Staley and Chris Rumph, who he brought in and signed as well. And so I think that these are 2 places where you're going to have to see a lot of rotation. I don't know that you see a ton of rotation for the first unit offensive line. Kelvin Banks Jr. at left tackle, Trevor Penning at left guard, Eric McCoy at center, Cesar Ruiz at right guard, Taesm at right tackle. I think that's probably going to stay pretty uniform. But do you find ways to get Will Clapp Jr. not just snaps at center, but also at guard? Do you find ways to get Dillon Radunz not just snaps at guard, but at tackle? Do you find ways to get Landon Young reps, not just at tackle, but at guard? You see what I'm saying? And so the rotation of that second and third team and moving those guys about, whenever you give one of the first team guys a rest day, can you get one of those other guys up and get them an opportunity, like Will Clapp getting an opportunity to play center with the first unit, all those other things? I think all that's really important. Because not only does that help you pick the right depth pieces to fill out the rest of your offensive line group, but also gives your offensive line a lot of experience with one another so that if somebody gets injured, you get an opportunity to get a player in there that's already done some work there over the course of the offseason. Last year the Saints were signing, Connor McGovern on a Tuesday to play on a Sunday. That's not a great situation to be in if you're any NFL team. And so those types of reps matter very much here during training camp when you're building team chemistry and trying to figure out your roster, yes, but you're also trying to get everybody comfortable with one another and familiar with one another. Similarly, over on the defensive side, like getting the stand-up edge rushers ironed out, getting those down linemen ironed out, getting those stand-up edge rushers reps as down linemen as well, in case you go to a 4-3 set at any point, or a 4-2-5 where you got 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. Like, have all these guys ready to do whatever, and you have so many now defensive tackles on this roster that I think that it's good to try to like drive that competition as best as you can and make sure that you're making the right decisions when it comes to those players and where they could potentially contribute to you. You've got guys like Christian Boyd and John Ridgway and Colin Saunders and Vernon Broughton, who all have a little bit of nose tackle experience, right? Davon Godchaux, who all have some nose tackle experience. They could play nose tackle. They could also play 3-4 defensive end if you need them to, but, in Davon Godchaux's case, but finding those guys that can play the nose tackle role, finding those guys that are really good contributors as 3-4 defensive ends, like Vernon Broughton, like Jonah Williams, like Nathan Shepard, who that's probably the position that he's strongest playing, I guess, in those situations. And so finding those players that will be able to contribute there, but also finding those that can do a little bit of everything. Like, can Jonah Williams also stand up on the edge while also being a 3-4 defensive end when you need him to be, so on and so forth. So finding those little moments where you can shuffle things around, get players exposure and experience to one another, but also get players exposure doing things that maybe you don't necessarily expect them to do right off the bat, but give them a chance to prove that. I think the same goes with wide receivers, like just to switch the conversation just a little bit. Same goes with wide receivers in terms of the routes that you ask them to run. So I think this rotation on the offensive and defensive line in the trenches, very, very important. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, we go from telling you what we want to learn to what we did learn going into the first day of New Orleans Saints training camp. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a party day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, know what our family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.